Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting broadcast with us here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. I know we've got a new audience today in the crowd on YouTube, so welcome in. And if you are new to us, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. Now, today and this moment actually is very bittersweet. It's sweet because it's awesome. We've got an amazing speaker who we're going to meet in just a second, but it's bitter because it's the end of our epic If-Then series. All week long, we have been featuring some of the most incredible ambassadors in women in STEM in the world. We have had deep sea explorers, we've had archaeologists, neuroscientists, and more. We've hung out with pikas, bugs. We made an ice storm in a forest. It has been a wild ride. I've learned so much. I hope you have too. And I really encourage all our audience, check out the If-Then series. Check out the entire ifthenSheCan.org page. There's so much to discover. The best resource hub I've ever found for any organization we've ever worked with. Don't tell any of the others. Now, I'm so excited today because we are diving and we're wrapping up with Nicole Sharp, who is a science communicator. And this is particularly fun for me because I'm a science communicator. It's a great gig. It's like the best job in the world. We pinch ourselves daily. Nicole has done a huge variety of things. She's been featured by New York Times, Guardian, Science, Wired, all the creme de la creme of media outlets in the world. And for the first time in this whole series, I'm going to read a little bit of the bio she sent me because it's so, I just want to get the words exactly right. So she's on any given day, she might be spilling molasses to explore a 100-year-old industrial accident, or filming barefoot on sand dunes while hang glider pilots fly a replica of a 120-year-old aircraft. Not all of us get to do that in our everyday jobs, even the cool people that we featured in this series. So I'm really excited to turn you over to her to blow your minds about what a science communicator gets to do and what their day-by-day looks like. And so without further ado, I'm going to stop talking. Nicole, welcome to the program, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Jesse. Thanks for having me. And hi to everybody else out there. I'm going to dive right in and give me just a second to pull up my slides so that you can see pictures of all the fun things that I get to do.
So as you're pulling this up too, I have to ask, what is behind you? Because we've had some interesting virtual backdrops, but yours looks like a jet going through some sort of slipstream into space. That's what
that's not too far off. So this is a NASA photo. One of the things that I absolutely love as a science communicator is that NASA photos are lovely, fair game for lots of different uses. But what this one is a model in a wind tunnel. And as you'll see in my talk, I have a thing for wind tunnels. I used to work in them a lot. And what you do with this particular model is you cover it in fluorescent oil and you turn the wind tunnel on, and then the oil shows you what it is that the air is doing as it goes around the model. So in particular, you can see areas where the air might be recirculating, and this can tell engineers things about essentially how well this aircraft would work under different conditions. It's kind of a fast and easy check for engineers instead of having to set up a much more complicated experiment. You can just kind of paint the model, turn everything on, and then take a look at it.
Nicole, I'm already captivated. We haven't even begun the presentation yet. So I'm going to just sit in the background, jaw agape to dive in with this. Let's do it.
All right. So let's talk first about what exactly is science communication anyway. I keep a pretty broad definition of this, and I think of science communication as anytime you're communicating science and scientific principles to a more general audience. That could be a totally public, I don't have anything to do with science audience, and it could be other scientists who just work in a different area than you. So I've got tons of logos up here of different places where you might have seen science communication on YouTube, on the radio, on television, even in webcomics. It's something that has kind of exploded over the last decade. But in all honesty, when I graduated from my PhD 10 years ago, this month actually, I had never heard the term science communicator. So for me, it's kind of funny to now be going around and telling people about what I do as a science communicator, because I didn't know this was a job back when I was in school. So on a day-to-day basis, what do I do as a science communicator? I do a lot of reading and a lot of writing. And that reading could be reading books. It could be reading scientific journal articles. It could be reading emails. My writing also is kind of all over the place. A lot of times it's taking notes on sources that I'm reading. It could be working on writing scripts. I'm writing a book right now, so there's a fair bit of that. Writing blog posts is a pretty daily thing for me because my blog runs 5 days a week. So that's a lot of posts to write. I also do a lot of talks. Some of them are virtual like this one. Some of them are in person, especially pre-pandemic. So there's a fair amount of time either doing or preparing talks on different subjects, sometimes to completely general audiences, sometimes to college audiences. I think I worked out that I've talked to everyone from like small children up to fellows of the Royal Society, which are basically, I hope they'll forgive me for saying this, but they're generally speaking very old scientists, but very distinguished scientists. Things that I also end up doing on a daily basis include working on videos. So over here on the right, I have a couple of examples of animations I've done in some of my videos. One of the fun things about making my own videos and not just writing in words is that I get to come up with visuals that go with the explanation. And so my notebook here, you can see this is a storyboard sketching out what my animations are going to look like. These are what some of the final products looked like. And then over on the left here, I've got a screenshot from one of my interviews. So I also really enjoy doing interviews with scientists, either interviewing them and then taking what they write or what they said and writing based on it. Or in this case, this is actually from a series of interviews that I did with students and researchers and professors, where I had them talk about their science in their own words. And what I did was I took that interview and I cut it together with footage and edited it together so that they were in their own words explaining to people in a very accessible manner what it was that their work was doing. And I find that a lot of fun because researchers oftentimes feel that they aren't good communicators of their work. But with a little bit of help from me as a science communicator, they can express their work in their own language. And it's very empowering for them to feel that like, wow, I did that and it came out so well. I sometimes get, you made me sound so good. And it's like, well, I just cut out the bad bits. That's all. Some days it's even weirder. So you heard about the this is the hang glider, the 120-year-old aircraft replica. This is actually an aircraft that I was helping them test out and fly that was designed and built and flown, the original version of it, before the Wright brothers. So the Wright brothers are famous for having come up with the first powered human flight. This is a design by a German engineer. Now we would probably call him an aerospace engineer or an aeronautical engineer named Otto Lilienthal. And he was an absolute world expert on how to fly reliably and repeatedly. So he flew his version of this design and other designs hundreds of times at a time when the idea of getting off of the ground in any way, shape, or form was just unfathomable. And honestly, if he hadn't had a accident with one of his flights, he probably could have beat the Wright brothers to powered flight. Let's see, what else do we have? So this picture over on the upper left, this is a fun one. This is actually, you can probably tell I'm in an aquarium. So I'm in a tunnel in an aquarium. There's some scuba divers' feet behind me. This was for a video that I filmed with my friend AJ here, where we went to the Oregon State Aquarium and we were talking about how pressure works. And we decided, let's show people how pressure behaves in action. And so we got a team of scuba divers to take objects like a balloon and film what it looked like at the top of the tank and then go down to the bottom of this tank at the aquarium and show what it looks like when you suddenly put several atmospheres worth of pressure on it. And that was a crazy, fun experience and a really wild day of filming. And down here in the corner, this is a picture of one of my drawings, actually, to represent work that I'm doing right now with folks at the Colorado School of Mines, learning about how fountain pen ink behaves. So there's actually hundreds, probably thousands. Yeah, definitely thousands of different inks that people who like fountain pens use. And there are certain like experiences and terminology that people in the community use to describe how those inks behave. And what I'm working with scientists to do right now is figure out how those perceived ways of the ink behaving correspond to the actual physical characteristics that we can measure in a laboratory. So we can explain what does it actually mean when somebody calls this ink wet or dry or lubricated, etc. And then the last one here is molasses. And we're going to dive a little deeper into molasses because this is one of the craziest things I've worked on. This, like the fountain pen work, is, I would say, original research that I did with other folks, in this case, folks at Harvard University. So molasses, you've probably seen it. It's thick, it's syrupy. That thickness is technically speaking, in fluid dynamics, we would call that viscosity. So it's a very viscous liquid, doesn't move very fast, except 100 years ago in Boston, where there was a molasses flood. I guess it's actually 105 years ago now, because it happened in 1919. So this is what the area looks like today. It's this lovely park, but 105 years ago, it looked more like this. And this right here that I've highlighted is the molasses tank. And it was massive. As you can see, it just towers over everything else in the neighborhood. This thing was 15 meters high. It's higher than this elevated railroad. It's taller than all the buildings around. And I think this is like the only picture I've been able to find of the tank with it intact. So this tank was used for storing molasses. Why were they storing molasses? Well, once they stored it and were ready to ferment it, they would send it across the river to Cambridge, where they had a factory, and they would ferment it into ethanol, which is this molecule here. It's a type of alcohol. And at the time, that was used to make munitions during World War I. So it was a booming business from the time the tank was built in 1915 until 1918. And I mentioned before that the tank failed in 1919. So what were they doing with it then? Well, they were trying to make a bunch of rum and sell it while they were waiting for everyone to switch all of the factories from wartime footing to peacetime footing, when they would use their ethanol again. But the factories weren't running at the time. So they were like, let's just make rum. That ended up not working out so well for them, because their giant, poorly built molasses tank came down one Wednesday afternoon around the lunch hour in January of 1919. And it was utterly devastating. If you look at these pictures, it looks like a tsunami came through, but it was a tsunami of molasses that just smashed everything up like kindling. You can see over here, this is the elevated railroad, has been buckled and taken out. No trains are going to run on that. This is the whole top of the tank that has taken out a couple of buildings nearby. A lot of this is workshops and houses that were nearby, just completely wiped out by this wave of molasses. And one of the things that I noticed when I started looking into this was there was a lot of discussion of the tank exploding. And this is just, it turns out, kind of loose language that people were using, because if you look at this lovely recreation by Harvard students in a scale model of the molasses flood, there's no exploding happening here. You're just releasing the molasses. I particularly like these tiny little scale people that get totally wiped out by this wave of molasses, because it really highlights, like, there's no explosion going on here. And also, there's no way those people are swimming in this. You're just getting bowled over by a giant wave of molasses. So I thought about this a little bit, and I said, this is a lot like some other flows, like an avalanche or a mudslide, or even lava flows, or the cold air that sneaks underneath your door in the wintertime. And all of those are something that we call gravity currents. And we have models for those. We have math that tells us how gravity currents behave. So I said, well, let's ask what a gravity current of molasses can do. And the historical records estimated that this molasses moved at about 35 miles an hour, which is 56 kilometers per hour, which is a pretty decent clip in a car. You know, that's faster than you can go in most neighborhoods. And it's definitely faster than any human can run, and even faster than horses could run. And I thought to myself, how in the world could molasses move that fast? Well, I did the math. I figured out that if you have that much molasses and you let it go all at once, in fact, it moves at about 35 miles an hour. And the reason that this works is that molasses is about 1.5 times denser than water. So when you pile up almost 15 meters of molasses with this nearly full tank, that's a ton of potential energy. And when you release it, all that potential energy turns to kinetic energy. And that is how you get molasses to move 35 miles an hour. What does that look like? Well, this is a description from somebody who was there firsthand. And he says it didn't look like molasses. It looked like a tidal wave, like a wave at the seashore coming in, like boiling oil. It was frothy. This was a super exciting quote for me as a fluid dynamicist, because I was like, ooh, he's definitely talking about turbulence. I mean, and we can all picture that. We know what waves at the seashore look like. But we've never seen molasses look like that. Molasses looks like this. It's slow. It takes forever to get out of your measuring cup. This is a machine that my colleagues at Harvard used to test molasses and see how it responds to different forces. So that's what we're actually doing right there. And that's important because we found that when molasses is cooled off, as thick as you think it is whenever you're trying to pour it at room temperature, it is way more viscous when it's cold. And that's important for the accident because after all this molasses spread over everything, the day was getting colder and colder. Remember, I said this was January. It was a relatively warm day during the daytime. It was about, I want to say, 5-ish degrees Celsius. But as you go into nighttime, it gets colder. That molasses gets more and more viscous. It gets harder to move, and it gets really hard to move all this molasses covered rubble to get it off of victims, which unfortunately this accident ended up causing 21 deaths and 150 injuries. And as you can see, it just completely wipes out this area in terms of all of the buildings. If you want to hear more about that story, I have a video that's going to be a theme. You could check out my YouTube channel and you could find out there. But that's what I have to say today about molasses. So that hopefully gives you a little bit of an idea of what I do as a science communicator. You're probably also wondering, how did I get here? So let me tell you a little story. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with space. Specifically, I wanted to live on the International Space Station. And I decided, okay, I'm going to study aerospace engineering. So I go to college, I kind of put up with my engineering classes, and it's not until one of my professors starts talking about how air moves around an airplane wing that I think, oh, hey, this is kind of cool. I want to hear more about this. Unfortunately, he said this in the context of, this is all I'm going to say about this, and you have to wait a year to take this other course to find out more. So I waited a year and I took that course and found out more. This is an image that I fell in love with as an undergrad. This is just a sphere, like a ball, that is moving faster than the speed of sound. And so this black line here is a shock wave that's bouncing off of a plate and going off this direction. And I became utterly fascinated by this kind of stuff in my class and said, okay, fluid dynamics, this is what I want to study. So I went to grad school. I spent a lot of time crawling in and out of these wind tunnels that you see me in right here. And I spent grad school learning about turbulence, which is this kind of chaotic state where things mix very easily. So this is a green dye and a red dye being released into a turbulent fluid. And as you can see, they mix and they end up all over the place very quickly. So I spent some time studying turbulence. Then I decided, I don't really think this is for me. So I changed directions. In my PhD, I moved down to Texas and I started asking the question, well, how do things get turbulent in the first place? So things can start out really smooth, like you see in this image, and very slowly over time, they start getting disturbed and then eventually end up turbulent here. And I said, well, let's find out how and why that happens. And the reason this is important at the speeds that I did it at. I did it at what's called hypersonic speeds, which is more than 5 times the speed of sound. Remember I said that that ball picture got me excited? I decided to spend some time dealing with things that were moving even faster than that ball. So this is actually the underside of a space shuttle. And this was a mission that flew in 2005, I believe. And there's a little thing sticking out right here. This is actually a piece of ceramic filled, what's called gat filler. It's basically ceramic infused cloth that was stuck between the heat tiles. And they didn't know what was going to happen with this thing sticking up. So they sent an astronaut to the bottom of the space shuttle, and had him pull it out with his fingers. And like, if you go to the National Air and Space Museum, they have this specific piece of gap filler in their collection. And essentially what they were worried about is, if this thing is sticking up, what if it causes that transition from the smooth flow to the turbulent flow, which is important at these speeds because turbulent flow mixes much better and it gets things much hotter. So if you were to look at the bottom of the space shuttle as it's re-entering the atmosphere, this is an infrared image. If you have something sticking up at this front part of the space shuttle, all of a sudden, all this area downstream is so much hotter than it would be normally. You know, these areas only, in these pictures, only a couple areas are really hot. This part of the space shuttle wasn't built to deal with these kinds of temperatures, just these little parts were. So that was the real concern behind the work that I did as a PhD student. And if you want to hear more details on that story, I also have a video about that on my YouTube channel, where I talk about it with Diana Coward, who you may know as Physics Girl, another science communicator. So here's one way of looking at my journey. I was fascinated by space, got interested in fluid dynamics, went all the way through my PhD. And as a PhD student, I started writing about it for my blog, FYFD. But honestly, that doesn't feel like it's a great telling of the entire story, because it's missing out on this whole other aspect of things. So let's do this one more time and do it a little differently. So when I was little, I was obsessed with books and stories. I loved them. I loved reading them. I loved getting together with my friend and pecking out on my mom's old electric typewriter, one key at a time, the stories that we would make up with each other. And by the time I got to undergrad, I decided to help, pay for things by working as a writing tutor. And I would spend my nights and weekends sitting down with other students and helping them become better writers, because I was just so interested in writing and telling stories. I also really liked playing in Photoshop. I had free access to it as a student and spent way too much time making what I thought were very cool wallpapers. And when I went on to grad school, I said, hey, why don't I get a nicer camera and spend some time making these cool images for myself? And that combined, once I got to grad school, into finding all of these really beautiful images of fluid dynamics and saying, why isn't there a place where I can see all these beautiful images and learn about what's going on? Why do we expect people to spend years and years learning lots of math and physics and calculus before we tell them about all these wonderful things that we have? And I thought that was silly. So I started my website, FYFD, as a graduate student, and just kind of started collecting really neat things that I found and spending a little bit of time every day explaining what those things were, what they meant, what we could understand as a result of these images and videos. And eventually I decided to take all of those different things that I was fascinated with and put them together and start making my own videos where I could talk about research. I could integrate visuals from different research projects. I could make my own visuals. I could take the skills that I'd learned playing around in Photoshop and extend them by doing video animation. And that is kind of how my my YouTube channel got born. And so that's a totally different look at how I got where I am. One is kind of like the technical look. This is, if you will, a more creative look, definitely a more story-focused way of thinking about my journey. And all of that brought me to where I am today. So the last thing I want to talk to you guys about is, hopefully you're maybe thinking to yourselves, the science communication thing sounds kind of fun. What do I need to be a science communicator? And what I'm going to tell you is kind of why science communication might be a good fit for you personally. So this is me at age 12, at a time when I certainly didn't know that I was going to be a science communicator, but I did have many of the characteristics I'm about to discuss that I think are really important for me being a science communicator now. So the first of these is you like learning new things. I spend so much of my time learning. And for me, that's a really exciting thing. I love to learn. I love to learn all different kinds of things. I always hated in school being expected to specialize, especially once you get to a PhD. They're like, just focus on this one thing. Only look at this one tiny little thing. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do more things. You love stories and storytelling. As I mentioned, I liked writing stories. I still like writing stories, both fiction and working in nonfiction. And I spend a lot of time actually studying the craft of how to tell stories, because that's a really important thing for me and what I do. Another thing that is really critical as a science communicator is liking sharing what you learn. That's kind of the whole point of what we do, is to find out cool things and to share it with other people. And then finally, you're not content with just one thing. As I mentioned, I always hesitated to just pick the one thing. When I was in middle school, they would say, oh, you could be on the basketball team or you can play in the band. And I said, I'm going to do both of them. And when I got to college, they said you could be an engineer or you can go, study German. And I said, well, I'm going to do both of them. And when I got to grad school, they said, well, you should only be spending your time looking at this particular subject very carefully. And I said, well, first of all, I'm going to look at all kinds of things having to do with fluid dynamics. And also, I'm going to go race bicycles now. So you just can deal with that. And that all fed into what I do now. So with that, I will wrap up the storytelling. And thanks to my collaborators at Harvard for all their amazing work on our Boston molasses flood project. If you're interested in finding out more about fluid dynamics, you can check out my blog at FYFluiddynamics.com. If you want to find out more things about me, about science communication, or about fluid dynamics, you can check out NicoleSharp.com/launch. And that will give you links to all the different places you can find me. And that is what I have to say.
Fantastic. Nicole, that was magnificent. And I love the little ending bit, but now I'm picturing you riding a bike at speed, yelling in German at people that you're going to do more than one thing at the same time. And that is a delightful mental place to go. I will note, I'm going to email all our registered classes. Like, you guys will get NicoleSharp.com/launch, the FYF fluid dynamics, like all of that will come to you. So stay tuned for a follow-up if you want to keep the learning going when we're done, because that is what we're all about. Now, you ended your presentation in a place that segues nicely into our first question, which is sort of how to become a science communicator. And you talk about all these really fun experiments that you have the chance to do. And what one of our classes was interested in is, what experiments would you recommend they do at home? Are there any sort of tried and true, easy class or family accessible experiments that you'd recommend to get your start? I don't know.
Oh my goodness. There are so many. Just about any brand of science you're interested in, there's some kind of an experiment that you can try to do on your own. And I think the beauty of doing that is getting hands-on, getting experience firsthand with what science is like, because that is, to me, a key ingredient to becoming a science communicator, is really having some experience and understanding firsthand of science.
I love experiment questions, and it's very rare that we actually feature them on these broadcasts. About a week and a half ago, we had our first ever elephant toothpaste experiment, which is just a go-to, easy, fun, exciting one that can be very colorful as part of a live book launch. So if you want to check that out, like all our things, it's on our YouTube channel, and it's one of those ones you can very easily look up. Elephant toothpaste is for our class that might be keen. And we've also featured a lot of biologists this week, and I want to stress, biology is really easy in the early days. All you need to do is go outside and look at animals and just highlight what you see, draw them, talk about it, share it.
Yep, absolutely. And if you want to try stuff having to do with fluid dynamics, my blog that you have a link to has an entire tag on it which you can find, I want to say you can find all the tags listed under archive. But there's one called DIY fluids that I use to tag anything that I think would be a fun thing to do at home.
I'm bringing this up as a full banner that I can show everyone really quick. So there you go. Lots of ways to keep learning going. I'll make sure all our classes have that too. Very, very cool. Nicole, so Science Communicator, you've highlighted a few places where people can find great science communication. Are there any other people that you'd recommend? You had Diana on in one of your sort of joint broadcasts. Are there places or individuals we could send kids when they're done to see the best and brightest in SciComm in the world?
Oh my goodness. There's so many people out there. I would struggle to give you anything comprehensive, but let's see. If you are into plants, I've got a friend, Molly, who does IRL science. So that one is a really fun one. Vanessa Hill, who is another IFTHN ambassador like myself, does these days a lot of sleep focused stuff, but she has a whole channel called Braincraft that's really interesting if you're interested in kind of psychology, neuroscience kind of stuff. If you're interested in engineering and learning about things like infrastructure and how we construct different things, Practical Engineering is a fabulous YouTube channel. And just stepping kind of even further out of specific subjects and out of the YouTube space, there's a whole website called The Conversation, which is a place where scientists write for general audiences about the work that they do. So that one's fun, both because you can go out and find out about these different subjects from people who are doing it, but also that if you are a scientist and you want to do some more science communication, you can look at actually being able to describe your stuff on that site. Another fun one for that is Fun Size Physics, which is more focused toward younger audiences. But it's the same kind of thing where scientists are describing the latest research or their own work or general concepts. I have a couple of articles on there about surface tension and viscosity and non-Newtonian fluids, all on Fun Size Physics.
I'm so glad that we got this question because I didn't know about half of these, and that's the joy of science communication, is that it's broadened so much. You talked about when you started, like you didn't even know this was a job, and when I was coming up, it was like the barest beginnings of it. Like there's a few people who made their life at SciComm, and now there's so many diverse ways of sharing this stuff. I'm going to recommend Frontiers for Young Minds, who we've partnered with, which is scientists working with kids to write kid-friendly articles. And then on YouTube, I'm just bringing this up, and I should have done this faster. Crash Course and SciShow are just spectacular YouTube channels, all manner of topics. Whatever you're keen on, there's probably something there too. So we've covered it all, Nicole. This is very exciting.
Also the Brain Scoop's back.
What? No.
Yeah. Did you not know that?
No.
Emily is posting at the Brain Scoop again. She got it back.
Oh my gosh. Emily, when I was in university, Emily Grassley, who we're talking about, had the Brain Scoop, which is one of the greatest things ever done, and was like, me and every other person at that time in SciComm was like, we just want to be Emily. That's so amazing. I didn't know that. Very cool.
Yep. Definitely check it out.
This is a very nerdy conversation in the middle of a nerdy broadcast, and I love it. So this is a good question because you're, again, highlighting all these great experiments you've had the chance to do. Is there a favorite experiment you've ever had a chance to do? Maybe it's one of the ones you mentioned. Maybe it's something totally different. No pressure at all.
Oh, my goodness. Like, what is my favorite experiment I've ever done?
Dun, 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 dun,
gosh, there are so many things that I've done. Okay. So here's kind of a fun thing that I did that I haven't talked about. So one of the things that we had when I was a PhD student was actually a flight research lab at the university. So we had our own kind of tiny little fleet of aircraft that we used as research aircraft. And so some of my classmates were actually the flight engineers, and I had other classmates who were the pilots. And I would sometimes help out as co-pilot for different experiments. And we also had students doing the ground crew. So I would get up at ridiculous o'clock because flight tests, like you always start briefings at like 5 a.m. And we had this Cessna O2 aircraft. It was actually an observation craft from like the Vietnam War
Sure.
that had been, repurposed so that you would hang part of a wing model from underneath it had, high up overhead wings, and you'd hang the wing model there. It was a 4-seater aircraft. One of the seats in the back was completely taken out and replaced with equipment to run all of the experiments. And then we had a student back there who was the flight test engineer, and then up front would be the pilot, and then myself or somebody else acting as co-pilot. And we'd take the airplane up to 10,000 feet, and we would do dives. So the pilot would try to fly at very specific conditions so that they could get the flow over the wing model outside the aircraft just what we wanted it to be. And then the flight engineer is taking all of the data down. And my job, whenever I was co-pilot, was basically safety officer. So since everybody else is busy looking at their dials and flipping switches, I had to make sure there were no other airplanes around that might interfere with the experiment. And because I did that a few times and had some experience doing that when I was a student, I actually spent spring break one time going and helping out doing flight tests down with some people at Georgia Tech. So there was a totally different aircraft that my friend, who was the flight engineer, and I outfitted. We were putting sensors all over the wings and like putting down pieces of Kapton tape that went the entire length of the wing. And let me tell you, trying to take a like 6-inch wide strip of tape and have it be 20 feet long and go on the entire front edge of the wing with no wrinkles is quite a feat. So we were doing things like that and then taking this airplane up and flying it. And what was particularly fun about that particular set of flight tests was the guy who was piloting for us was a flight instructor. And so he actually had me land the plane. So I got to not just fly a plane a couple of times, but actually land a multi-engine aircraft as part of my PhD.
That is wild. Lucky you. And by the way, landing the plane super cool. Getting a long piece of tape like that without thing is the real marvel. Like
I'm telling you, it was tough.
I am the worst. I am noteworthy for my terrible Christmas present wrapping skills with even the tiniest bits of tape. So I bow down. I'm in awe at that inspiring tale. Nicole, time flies and you're having fun. We're nearing the end of the broadcast. So you ended your presentation so nicely with this overview of how people can get to SciComm, but is there anything you want to leave our kids with today, both as an individual speaker within this If Then series on SciComm, in the broader series context of amazing careers in STEM? No pressure at all. I'm putting it all on you, but is there a way you want to wrap us up before we say farewell?
Oh my goodness. Yes, no pressure there. Well, I think what I would say sort of for myself is that when I was a kid, I really could not imagine almost any of the stuff that I've done now. I don't think as a kid, even when I decided to be an aerospace engineer, that I truly had any idea what it was that aerospace engineers do. What that means is that there are possibilities ahead of you that you probably haven't even imagined yet, and that may come into existence between now and the time that you choose your career. It doesn't have to be, just the same 20 or 2 options that show up on a quiz that you might have to take in junior high or high school. There's stuff out there that you don't know about yet. And that means that there are a lot of interesting possibilities that may come up, and lots of ways that you can take all the different interests you have and bring them together. Now, that said, there's a whole lot more access to finding out about the things that are out there than I had when I was your age. And that, I think, is one of the really fabulous things about the If Then program, is that you can go to that website, ifthenSheCan.org, and find out about over 120 amazing women, only a fraction of whom have appeared here this week, But we cover the gamut, just every kind of person you could imagine, and every kind of subject you can imagine, from fire specialists to people who study picas to right now, actually, one of our ambassadors, one of my friends, is currently in Antarctica. She just spent the entire summer working at the South Pole. She's currently at McMurdo and posting lots of pictures on her Instagram of penguins because she's still waiting for an aircraft to actually make it down from New Zealand to pick them up. So like literally you can find so much.
Nicole, that was such a inspiring, heartening message. And again, we have featured so many amazing ambassadors on our program. I can't wait for the opportunity to do even more with If Then and just scientists and explorers all around the world. And the world is your oyster, kids. Honestly, almost a unifying factor to everyone we featured this week is the fact that they had options, they pivoted, they changed what they were doing, they followed their interests. And you can do that whether it's in science, art, history, sports, music, whatever your fancy. Just be excited, be curious, and see where life takes you. And there's no better message than that. So, Nicole, thank you for being a world-class science communicator and presenter today. That was a wild ride. And as I said, I will share all the information about her fluid dynamics page, her website, more to keep the learning going. But for now, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much, Nicole. Bye.
Thanks so much.